Hello friends, this is Dr. Jiten Udhas, Assistant Professor at Institute of Language Teaching, English Medium B.Ed College, Rajkot. And this is Lockdown Look, the Corona Effects. Today we are going to learn about National Education Policy 1986. This policy is an offspring of 1968's National Education Policy, the first ever after independence. The 1968's policy was formulated in the time of Indira Gandhi as Prime Minister, while this 186 policy had been formulated in the time of Rajiv Gandhi as Prime Minister. This policy of 1986 primarily focuses on the removal of social disparity among Indians, as well as giving opportunities to Indian women, scheduled tribe and scheduled caste community. This policy focuses on student-centered approach, child-centered approach. And due to this policy, we got our first open university, Indira Gandhi National Open University. So this policy has recommended the concept of open university. This policy also echoes the Gandhiji's concept of rural university. In 1986, when this policy was formulated, 6% of GDP was allocated to education sector. In this video, we are going to learn what are the objectives. Like, first of all, we'll have this video we'll be able to explain the details about new education policy in 1986. Secondly, list out significant recommendations of new education policy. Significant recommendations we'll be able to list out. And thirdly, you will be able to evaluate the need and importance and characteristics of a national education policy. So let us start with the background and the backdrop of this policy. Like, as I said, the post-independent period was marked by reviews of education made by several commissions and committees. So many commissions and committees came after independence to evaluate the education situation in India, and it was the prerequisite and the need of the hour. So it was needed. Here I'll mention the three major commissions which were formed after independence. The first was University Education Commission in 48-49, which focused on the issues of university and the recommendations for that. Secondly, there was Secondary Education Commission 52-53. It focused on the school, secondary, higher secondary school recommendations. And thirdly, it was Education Commission in 1964-66, which is popularly known as Kothari Commission, and it focused on the overall education scenario and the needs and recommendations for the improvement of education. Later there came so many committees, but here today we are going to discuss about this 1986 policy. Like, Rajiv Gandhi, then Prime Minister of India, announced in January 1985 that a new education policy would be formulated in the country. The country would formulate a new education policy. A status paper called Challenges of Education, a policy perspective, was issued by the Ministry of Education, Government of India, with appraisal of the existing system of education. There was countrywide debate on educational reforms in the country. Finally, the new national policy on education was approved by the Parliament in May 1986. Now, what was the need of this, or what needs stretched us or brought us towards bringing this policy? Some of the basic concerns and needs were: the one was provision of education of a minimum quality for all children. That was the primary need, that there must be minimum quality of education provided to all the kids. Secondly, removal of illiteracy, because in 80s era so many people were illiterate in India. Even in today 2020 we find a number of illiterate people, so you can imagine how would have been the case in 1980s. Thirdly was social transformation towards equality. So people should consider each other equal, one another equal. And lastly, orientation of education to work and employment. How to correlate education with work and employment. That was also one of the needs. Let us quickly consider some of the characteristics of it. Firstly, the first characteristic is education as a significant nation building exercise. This policy has considered education as a nation building exercise because it is a major and worthwhile investment in human resource development with huge return for the welfare and progress of nation. If you would invest in human through education, you would get a huge return for the welfare and progress of the nation. So that is one of the characteristics. Next, education for all. This policy believed in education for all. Education must be for all people of all sectors. at different stages from childhood through later childhood, adolescence, and youth to adulthood. So, at every level, education should be provided because there was a number of adults and youth and even old age people who were illiterate in 1980s. So, education for all was one of the characteristics. Next is equality of educational opportunities. As I primarily said in the introduction, that equality, removing social disparity, has been the core characteristic of this policy. Equality of educational opportunities must be sought and reasonably attained by all the citizens. Like equality in access, like they should be able to join school equally without any partiality. Equality in learning facilities, all the learning facilities should be provided to all the students irrespective of their caste, creed, and religion. Equality in achievement must be achieved. So the achievement should be on the basis of merits and skills rather than the caste or creed or anything. So that was one of the characteristics. Then education must help harmonious development and the cultivation of individuality for of all for their individual benefits as well as social benefits. So education should help harmonious development and individual development, which in a way in the long run be helpful to the society, which will create a social benefit for everyone. So that is one of the characteristics. Next is all must have a basic core of general education and certain core elements which make them proud and true Indians. So the Indianness should be ingrained in the curricula or syllabi of different universities as a part of education. So that was also characteristic. Lastly, experience in socially useful productive work. So such experiences should be provided which will be helpful in the society to them. It will in the productive way. And should be provided at the elementary stage, so primarily or secondary level. Next, vocational training at different levels thereafter. After certain experiences, there should be given vocational trainings. And lastly, higher academic specialization and professional education may be given at the university stage. So professional or higher academic specialization should be provided at university level. Before that, at every level, vocational training should be made compulsory, and there should be given initially experiences which is socially helpful, useful. So these are the characteristics of this educational policy 1986. Now, what are the major recommendations? The first had been access to education by all. That was the first. All students have access to education of a comparable quality. So certain level of like 1 to 14 years free education which has been there in our constitution, that is the same thing being recommended by this. To achieve this, how every child, all children in the country will be able to access education. So that would be possible through appropriately funded programs by government. Apart from that, there would be a common schooling system recommended in the 1968 policy. For that, effective measures would be taken. That was a recommendation. Like what 1968 policy has said, that there should be a common school system. So wherever a child is learning, it should have common school system, the way we are having Kendriya Vidyalayas and all, that way. That was the first recommendation, access to education. Secondly, common educational structure. Like initially the structure had been 10 plus 2 plus 3. Some of you might have studied through this structure, gone through. Myself had been in this structure. That was accepted in all parts of the country. So common structure in all the states of India. And later, after 10 years, it was proposed that the structure would be modified to more like 5 plus 3 plus 2 plus 2 plus 3. So 5 is primary, low primary section, 3 years is higher primary, 6 to 8, 1 to 5, 6 to 8, then 2 secondary, 9, 10, 2 higher secondary, 11, 12 and college. Currently, this structure is in practice. So what had been proposed in 1986 had already been put into implementation. Next is national curricular framework with a common core. This common core has been very much focused. Common core is the general gain from the education. What should be the common gain? The common core will include the history of Indian freedom movement, the constitutional obligations, as well as the content essential to nurture national identity. So this thing should be included in common core, like history of Indian freedom fighters, like how we have got history, who are our forefathers and all. Then constitution obligations, that what are the rights and fundamental duties and all the aspects which help to nurture the Indianness in us. Like these elements cut across subjects areas and will be designed to promote values through languages. Particularly, these elements are provided to us, had been provided, or have been provided to us. Like all educational programs will be carried on a strict conformity with secular values. Secular values. It's like India is a secular country, so it doesn't support any single religion. It doesn't teach any religion or any spiritual cult or something. So secularism should be in hand, it should go with all the education programs. So national curriculum framework with common core was one of the recommendations. Next, education for international understanding, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. We are having this philosophy in our blood, like the whole world is a family, so that should, through education, it should be promoted. Then equality of opportunity of education, so every student should get equal opportunity. We have already discussed this. Minimum level of learning, ML. So at every level, a minimum level of learning should have been decided, and the teachers or the universities or the educators should make sure that the student who is going to school has achieved that minimum level of learning. Then open and distance learning. I initially in the opening scene only I said that Indira Gandhi Open University was the gift of this policy. So open learning as well as distance learning, because as I said in 1980s there was a big share of citizens who had been illiterate. So distance learning and open learning had been recommended by this policy, through this policy. Strengthening of national institutions like NCRT is there, UGC is there, AICT is there, NCT is there. All these national institutes which are working for bettering education, they should be strengthened through some educational programs or initiatives, because if they would be strong, then they would be able to provide a better education to the coming generation. So these were the major recommendations of this National Education Policy 1996. Yes, promotion of languages was one of that. Already 3 language formula had been promoted in 1968 following the Kothari Commission's recommendation, like mother tongue, national tongue, Hindi or something, and English at the higher level. So 3 languages, and here the languages had been recommended to get promoted, but in a different way, like through translation of books from one language to another language, and publishing multilingual dictionaries and glossaries. Apart from that, the young will be encouraged to undertake the rediscovery of India. They would be encouraged to discover India in their own way, with their own image, in their own perception. So, and they would be able to narrate them in their own language. So in a way, the languages would get promoted. All these constitutional languages should be promoted. That's what the policy recommended. Later, pooling of resources. Whatsoever resources we are having, like particularly for science and technological area, special measures will be taken to establish network arrangement between different institutions. They would be connected, like there are certain institutes and they should be connected for some common goal for national importance. So that pooling of resources, getting together all those resources, combining, integrating those resources for a better, for a higher projects, and for working for the national national upgradation or integration. So there are certain universities which are having certain skills or expertise, like state of art infrastructure is there. Some of the universities are having excellent experienced professors all. Some of the institutes are having library and all. So they should be integrated for a bigger work, for a bigger project. So that was also recommended, because every state, every university is having some expertise, some skill, but they are not integrated, they are not amalgamated, mixed. That's why they are not able to give results at the full potential. So pooling of resources was also recommended. Next, priorities of educational reforms, like educational transformation, reducing disparities, universalization of elementary education. Universalization means at nationalized level, all the children of the country should be able to get elementary education. Next, adult literacy. The adult who are literate, they should be made literate. And scientific and technological researches. To perform these reforms, the nation as a whole will assume the responsibility to provide resource support. Whosoever has certain support, whosoever is willing to, or create that feeling in the citizens, in the institutes, in the universities, in the educationists, in the social workers, that they should come forward with and provide whatever resource support they are having to prior to achieve the educational reforms. So put these reforms into priority and work together as a country, as a nation, to bring these reforms. That was also one of the recommendations. Now, what are the merits of this particular policy? Number one is national system of education. It has been given a single national system of education that every state can follow it, every university can follow it. So the education would be in coordination, and it would be on a single thread. Secondly, Operation Blackboard, very important work, very important. It's very much important as far as MCQs of competitive exams are concerned. Like which policy has initiated Operation Blackboard, or which policy recommended to initiate Operation Blackboard, and it is National Education Policy 1986. Operation Blackboard primarily targeted at the qualitative growth of education. By 80s, like India got independence in 1947. By 86, and in the 40 years, the education, the schools, there have been number of schools, universities, colleges. So qualitative growth, physical growth was there, but this operation focused on qualitative growth, providing excellent resources, materials, training and all to the teachers as well as students. So this is Operation Blackboard. So that is one of the merits. Next is Navodaya school. Now the concept of Navodaya school was of national education policy, and it's in today's date, in current date also, it is very much successful. Vocational targets. This policy set vocational target to provide vocational courses to students, to motivate them to take vocational courses, which will at the long run would provide them with a better livelihood. It targeted, like by 1990 they had targeted 10% of students should be directed towards vocational course, and by 1995 20% of students should be directed towards ITIs and all the vocational target courses. So that is also one of the merits. Delinking degrees from jobs. Not every job requires a higher amount of percentages or marks or CGPAs, but some of the areas, some of the jobs require skill level, expertise. So this policy in 1986, before more than 30 years, had advocated that all the jobs have not to do with, or not concerned with what marks or what grades you have got. Certain jobs would require the actual expertise and skills. So that activity had started with this policy, that delinking degrees from jobs in certain areas. That is one of the merits. Performance and accountability. This policy gave importance to the performance rather than the experience or the scores. It also gave importance to accountability for certain work, like who is responsible for something. National Testing Service. It was one of the very brightest recommendation by this policy, that there should be one such facility of National Testing Service which can evaluate the brightest students from all over the country, and which would be completely objective and reliable, as certain schools or colleges or universities from the different states would grade students in a different way. So they cannot, the score or the result cannot be termed as reliable. So there must be some National Testing Service which should evaluate objectively and authentically. And lastly, raising resources. To raise resources from wherever the resources can be obtained, pooling the resources as we had seen. That was one of the merits. Like it helped educational projects and certain educational targets to get achieved easily, because they raised resources, and those resources helped the projects in getting accomplished. So raising resources, like right now in corona condition, Indian government is also focusing on raising resources. Like government is, if it's unable to achieve the targeted production of certain things in through their proper channel, then they are raising resources. Like DRDO has been assigned certain tasks. Even some of the private entrepreneurs have been assigned. In Rajkot only, this Jyoti CNC has been assigned to produce ventilators for hospitals. Railway has been assigned to create isolation wards. So that is raising resources. You have got so many resources, but the point is, the trouble is we don't know how to utilize them. So raising resources was one of the merits. Now let us focus on some of the limitations. The first one is it has totally ignored the concept of neighborhood school, which was very much emphasized by Kothari Commission. Neighborhood schools is the schools nearby the students, where the children in the remote areas where the kids or the families are living, and they don't have access to the school. The schools are nearly 20, 30, 14, 50, 20 kilometers away. So what about them? So that concept, right now it's there. In Gujarat also, if you're Gujarati, you must have seen some outskirts schools are there. In Gujarati it is called Seam Shala. Seam Shala means school. Seam means the outskirts. So ગામની બહાર school હોય છે. So that concept has been totally ignored. So the first recommendation, access to education to all, is delimited over here because they have ignored the neighborhood school concept. Secondly, this policy remained silent on the existence of public schools. There had been there had been constant growth of private schools. The privatization of education was taking place, but this policy did not mention it or did not created guidelines or regulations for that. Apart from that, they didn't check the working of management of such schools. Means the management should have been in the hands of some government authorities, like how to manage, because this school started exploiting students as well as teachers and all. So that is also one of the limitations. Multiplication of institutions, like they have created monitoring institutions at state level prior, at district levels, like district education training and district offices and all. They were monitoring the education system. Now they have also created certain regional blocks and state level blocks. So now who will observe whom? That was blank. So the district level education the centers didn't have any clue what they are supposed to do now, because there were already state level blocks had been there to evaluate. So multiplication of institution has also created a kind of chaos among the monitoring bodies. No reference to basic system of education, like how to provide basic education. They have already recommended that education should be for all and all everything, but there wasn't any specific reference how to achieve that. Working hours in schools, though they focused or emphasized on utilizing the pools and resources, and through Operation Blackboard they provided facilities and all, but for using those facilities they should have extended the school hours, like from 5 hours to 6 or 7 hours or 8 hours, which they haven't done. So that was also a limitation. They could have recommended that the schools would be for 7 hours or 8 hours or something. And lastly, financial aspect not worked out. That was the biggest limitation, biggest drawback. Like they have given all the recommendations, but there hadn't been the follow-up work in the financial authority. Like if you had recommended something, then you should have allotted certain budget to certain recommendation. To achieve this recommendation, we would allot this much budget, and that financial workout was not done. So many of these recommendations remained only on the paper, only on the flow chart, and didn't work out. So that was also one of the limitations. So thank you very much. Here we tried to in a very precise way understand the National Education Policy 1986. We understood the backdrop of it. We discussed the needs, the characteristics, the recommendations, merits and limitations. Institute of Language Teaching English Medium B.Ed College thanks you all for watching this video. I hope it will be useful for you as far as your B.Ed M.Ed exams are concerned. Apart from TET, CTET, NET, GCET exams are there. And please share among your friends and stay tuned. We'll be here with more such videos. Thank you very much. Thank you.